So, welcome to the first episode of Cultural Animals. This is the Museum Leadership Lab. It's a new podcast, and we wanted to bring respected leaders from across museum operations, development, marketing, data fields, to share insights and experiences shaping the future of museum industry. I am your host, Antonio Velasco. I am the founder and CEO of Veevart. And today we're joined by Nik Honeysett, the CEO of the Balboa Park Online Collaborative, and you help museums and cultural institutions in all like there's the digital transformation. So it is great to have you, Nick, and we wanted to start just by perhaps you could tell us a little bit about kind of yourself and your background, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. Well, it's a pleasure to talk to you, Antonio. I know we've known each other a while, so this is a great series that you're launching. So I appreciate being invited to talk here because this is my favorite subject, right? Me. Um, so I've been in museum technology since the late '80s. I did a physics undergraduate and an electronics postgraduate. I was set for a career in particle physics, but that didn't happen. But I started off at the BBC in interactive television, which was a thing in the mid '80s where they were thinking about not necessarily the quality of the picture, so the number of lines, but more about how you might have controls for more humor or more drama or more horror. And that, which was a weird concept, right? But it kind of set the groundwork for kind of what I've done for the last years, which is thinking about audience engagement, right? And how do you use technology to do that?
But
So
but how
I,
did you but how did you went from physics to like, okay, well, I'm just gonna work on museums? Like, how
so
does that
I,
happen?
I did a lot of image recognition. So when you do physics and
Oh.
electronics, right, you do a lot of programming. So I'm a recovering programmer. So I did a lot of image recognition. I actually did a project with industry, which is to do some control of machinery through image recognition. And I went to college in a town called Brighton, which is on the south coast, which is kind of a hub for now it's a real hub for digital agencies, but even in the '80s, it was kind of emerging because it's fairly close to London. And so there was this new startup founded out of the local university there from the cognitive studies department. And they were trying to productize some software that they built. The company's about to celebrate its 40th anniversary. And they had been developing a programming language called AlphaPop for the Macintosh. Okay, I'll tell you the story. So we started off for about a year doing this list processing language, kind of information analysis, kind of building like which was called expert systems, right? I don't know if you're old enough to remember that, but they were called expert systems, right? And they were information systems that would help experts do their job. And it was going really well for about a year, and then all the experts suddenly realized that this kind of software was going to take their job away, right? Kind of like where we are now with AI. And so the market just disappeared literally overnight. And so there were three of us in this startup, and Alex, the lead guy, he was in London and he was in a bar next to the National Gallery in Trafalgar Square, and he was kind of depressed, right? He was kind of crying into his beer because he didn't know he thought this startup wasn't going to make it. And there's a guy sat next to him who's also crying into his beer. And he's just been hired by the National Gallery in London. They're building a new wing, and he's been hired to use technology to enhance the visitor experience, right? So this is about
Oh,
88,
wow.
89. And it's kind of carte blanche, right? And we've been doing a few things. We'd actually delivered an interactive system in '88 for when Edinburgh was the city of European culture, and it was kind of a showcase of technology. And we'd actually built this interactive system. It's kind of black and white, it was on a Windows, free machine. I mean, it was bare bones, but it worked. And so they get talking, and he says what his problem is. And so Alex is like, well, we've been working on this thing. Why don't you come down to Brighton and we'll talk? So he comes down to Brighton, and we come up with this idea of, okay, we're going to get a big screen. It's going to be color, and there's going to be an image on one side of the screen, and then there's going to be text on the other. And the image is going to be a collection object, and then the text is going to tell you about it. And he's like, brilliant. So we built a prototype. Again, this is the late 80s, right? We built this prototype on a very low-powered Macintosh, couple of screens, and we pitched it to American Express, who were part of the donor group that was helping fund
The
this new
project.
room, the project, and we got the gig. I mean, none of us believed, and so that was it. And I had done all this image processing stuff, so I was programmer
So
on the
you
project.
actually you entered the museum through the collection side of things.
So through the collection. So we start, and so what, museums are places of emulation, right? And this is kind of applicable to you as a vendor providing a product. Museums rarely have a formal process for selection, right? It's normally so and so, told me about, they're using whatever it is down the road, so we should use that,
Yeah.
and that happens a lot and it's incredibly frustrating. But it worked for us, right? So we're doing this interactive system,
It worked
it
for
took,
us too. Like it worked for us. I mean,
yeah,
the fact that the RFPs get a lot of bad rep. It's
mhm,
like as vendors, like we hate them.
right,
Uh because you spend like just like amazing amount of time in there and then you close some and then you don't close others, but the time spent is just and it's just like, hey, can we just have a conversation so we can just say if we're a good
right,
match or not? And it's like, no, you have to fill the RFP.
right. So it's two extremes, right? It's either that
Eh,
or it's
eh,
we're just, I remember we did a collections management study for Lyrasis, and I was doing a market study because they have a collections management system that was open source. And I remember bringing up Past Perfect, right? Who probably,
everyone.
so Past Perfect, it probably has a third of the market in museum collection systems. And I called them up and I said, what's your process for sales, because they don't have a lot of sales information. And they're like, I just sit by this is literally what they said. They said, I sit by the phone every day and we'll get three or four calls. People with a credit card just want to buy it. Right? They don't go to shows or expos or anything. It's just somebody picks up the
Eh,
phone, takes the credit card number, sets them up. Because
it,
people
it'll be
use,
wonderful to know that story of the guy who created it. Because I don't think there were too many people. I think there was like a guy. Like I
mhm,
assume, because
yep,
it was just like, and he just, I don't know, and he had like the total market, like for years of this thing,
yeah.
right? So,
Well,
and so
they
how
have
did
a
you get to
third
the
of the
gig,
market.
Nick?
So
So how
so we
did you
do this.
move to America then at that moment, I guess, afterwards?
I spent about 14 years at CogApp in just building museum interactive systems, building asset management systems, building collections management systems. Because those days, right, you couldn't call up somebody and say, I want a digital asset management or a collection, because they didn't exist. So you had to build it then.
Yeah.
Um, so when I left there, I had worked in 140 different museums, about 10 a year. But anyway, so we deliver this project for the National Gallery funded by Amex, and Amex said, this is great. We want one in the US. So we didn't even have to pitch for it. They said, how much is it going to cost for you to put one into the National Gallery of Art in Washington? So we ended up building the same thing in Washington. So I lived in the US for about a year and a half in the mid 90s. And during that time, I there was a woman who was kind of curating that micro gallery project. She moved to the Getty and she'd been there a while. And I'm like, if there's ever a job down there, because I had gone and pitched to do a micro gallery for the Getty, and I was blown away, right? If you've ever been to the Getty, the villa, this was before the center opened, but beautiful and rich. And I'm like, I had to get me some of that. And so I just, a couple of years went by and a job opened up and she gave me a call and said they're looking for somebody. Somebody flew over to the UK. I met with them and we had a conversation. And then, yeah, they hired me, brought me over in 2000. So first of
How
all, I
long,
was running the web group, and then I moved into administration.
so you've been in the States for 25 years.
25 years, yeah. October 2000 is when I moved. It's when we moved over, and I had small kids, right? I had a 3-year-old and a year and a half year old. So it was
At
a
that
bit
moment.
at that moment. Yeah.
And your wife was like, all right, let's move.
Well, she was American. She grew up in America, but she had moved back to
Oh,
the UK when her parents retired, so they were British. And she lived in the next village to me, and we had one option. We had actually there were three options. It was either because she's a Kiwi originally from, so we were either going to go to New Zealand, the US, or somewhere in Europe. I was actually talking to Lego when Lego first started their kind of digital. Um,
yeah. Like for the
Originally it was
catalog.
right. Originally they started doing CD-ROMs as an
Mm.
accompaniment to Lego, and then now they're a big industry, kind of entertainment industry organization. But then they were hiring digital people to do you know CD-ROMs, interactives, all that kind of stuff. And so I nearly ended up at Lego.
Oh, you skip that. So and when did you lose your accent, man?
It's gone. There are still some words I'd say.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah. It's like the brilliant and yeah, yeah, but
right.
it's almost gone there.
That was a
And
losing
so and
battle.
so how was Getty?
You know, I had a privileged job in a privileged institution, right? And so when I was running the web group, it was I had a big budget and could do what I wanted, and that was a really good time. But I was very attracted to the vendor community, right? So I have at that time, you know, money was no object. I mean, it really was a good time. But the problem with the Getty is that money comes with problems.
Mm.
Um, the it's a
Doesn't it always?
right. I mean, it was a massively political environment. Um, and so I moved into administration in the museum, and it
And what do you mean? Like, what do you mean by administration? Like, when you mean it's like,
so like a COO, right? So I had operations. I had initially I had
admissions,
visitor services. I had finance. I had collections information. That was a big department. I had an imaging team. And so I was responsible for HR for all the museum. When I first moved over, there was about 460 people in the museum. And then when I left, there were 200 people left in the museum because, like I said, it was very political. All these units are vying for people. And I just couldn't, the things that they were doing just didn't sit well with me, particularly around education. At some point, they made a new trust president made a decision about gutting the education program at the Getty, which was kind of the gold standard in
yeah,
museums.
yeah.
And I'm like, I'm out of here.
And so from going technical, because
Mhm,
one of the things is that, in the museum, or one of the things that I wanted to do with this podcast is there are so many people that entry into these leadership roles in museums,
mhm,
and they enter to different doors, right? Sometimes some
mhm,
entry through fundraising, and some entry into to collections like yourself, and some entry, just managing visitor services, and there's such a big turnover. And
mhm,
and so one day this person that was perhaps not like they see herself or himself in this leadership position. And so how was that experience of just managing HR, and like you didn't have the fundraising part thing, but you did have like the logistics at that moment and other stuff, and like so many challenges you didn't encounter before, right?
Well, it's kind of so when I was running the web group, it was a there was a weird kind of organizational thing where it was actually a business unit in the Getty. It wasn't a department.
Hmm.
So I was kind of operating at this level alongside the administrators for each of the divisions in the Getty. So the Getty has the trust which oversees it, and then it has a conservation institute, it has a research institute, it has a foundation, and it has a museum. At that time it had the web group as well, and it was just this weird way that it had been set up. So, and as you progress in, coming from a technical, and this is true for any kind of discipline, you enter doing that discipline, that kind of programmatic work, and then you get promoted, you supervise, you manage, and then maybe you're a department
Yeah.
manager. You do less and less of that skill set, so there's this gradual transition
Yeah.
of I stopped doing programming and I was, managing and budgeting and doing the finance and, HR and all that kind of stuff in a small group. So it wasn't the transition that it seemed to be from the outside. It was purely just more people but doing the same thing, right? I'm
Gotcha.
doing budgeting, I'm doing finance, but now I have somebody who does the budgeting and the finance. I'm doing HR. Before I was just having conversations with my team, and then
Yeah.
I've got an HR assistant, and I'm doing HR, and it's a much bigger scale, and I'm doing comp studies and all that kind of stuff. So it's a gradual transition, and I think I may be biased coming from the kind of technical side of things, but people who are technical have really good analytical skills, right? Because technical, digital exposes the reality of what you're dealing with, right? Because you've got to, if you've got to, for you, right? You're implementing a software application. There's no ifs, buts, and maybes. It's like it's got to do this thing and do it in
Has to
this
work.
way, right? That's the work, has to work. And so that's a mindset that technical people have. And so when you come into a role, for me, learning something new was a technical kind of analysis problem to solve, right? You look at
Right,
it from a
right.
technical standpoint, you figure out what makes it work, and then you implement it. And I think, certainly for me, my physics background, which teaches you, hypothesis, test, that kind of stuff. I have an analytical mindset, but it's just, any job that you go in, hopefully you've got to learn something to get into it, right? Hopefully you don't go into it
Yeah.
and you know everything. Otherwise, that's a really boring thing. So you have to
Absolutely.
expect to learn something new, and that's what keeps you, smart and
Interesting,
interesting.
engaged.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. And how did you move to Balboa Park then? Like how does that transition, how did that happen?
So in when I was head of administration, I reported to the museum director. And over the course of 7 years, I reported to six different museum directors, right? That's what so I'm a connoisseur of the art museum director, right? I know what a good one is and I know what a bad one is. Um, and it just got to the point where I was like, I've got to look for another job. I got to be I saw incompetence at the museum director level. I'm like, I could do that. And I think I could do it better. So I started looking for a museum director job. And what the feedback I would get to board interviews, but the feedback was, you've never reported to a board, because I wasn't allowed to, you try to approach the Getty board and they tackle you to the ground. So I'd never reported to a board, and I'd never done any fundraising, right? Because the Getty is purely endowment run, so there's no
Yeah.
development. And so I'm like, I got to find a job where I report to a board and I am doing fundraising. And I had been so BPOC has been around for about 20 years now. So I wasn't the founding director. But Rich Cherry was the founding director, who used to be at Skirball, then the Broad. I think he may be back at the Broad doing some projects. He had left, but he had brought me on as an advisor. So I was on the board of BPOC, and there was an interim director who left, and I was tasked with finding, because I have a big network in that museum technology world, I was tasked with finding the next director. So, wrote the job description, reached out to some people, and I was at a board
Like,
meeting
hey, it's just
presenting.
me.
Well, that's what happened. I'm presenting this approach to hire a search firm, and the board chair says, "But that's you, that job. Do you not want it?" And I'm like, "Well, I know the finances, and you can't afford me." So they're like, "Well, if we can find a donor who could support you, would you do it?" I'm like, "Fine." So they lined up the trustee who. So the BPOC was started by a foundation, a local foundation in San Diego, and so they set me up with him. We had a conversation, and he's like, whatever you need,
Go
ask
for
for
it.
it, and that was it. And so I've been here in 2014, yeah, 11 years now.
Wow. Wow.
And I
Wow.
just, just the concept of this kind of shared service where you're providing, which is what half of what we do is we're a technology department, an IT department for the museums in the park. Some of those are volunteer only, and some of those are big institutions like the Museum of Art. And so we have this shared service model. We have a small team. So we do desktop support. We do strategic initiatives all around IT. We do file hosting, application hosting, that kind of stuff. And then the other half is just trying to really build out the business, build in some earned revenue to bring back into the park. So a couple of us do strategic consulting that mostly started off as digital strategy, digital
Mhm.
transformation, but that touches everything, right? And so it kind of transitioned into kind of just generic strategic planning, although we do have this particular skill set in digital transformation, digital strategy. Uh,
It's so funny, in a previous life, I was working for Salesforce, and I was doing the implementation of Salesforce for Renault France.
mhm.
And at some point, the one of the head of the departments is like, we all know that at the end we're all gonna be ending up doing software. It's like whatever job you
Right.
do,
Mhm.
it's like
You're
we're
right.
all gonna be end up doing software in some shape or another. So that absolutely makes all the sense of the world. So
Yeah.
so Nick, entering into more like the technical topic of things.
Mhm.
You were saying about you've seen a lot of museums. You've seen like small, medium, large museums. Um, and if you were going to break like some of the challenges that they're having right now, what do you think? What are you seeing out there that they're the main challenges for museums and different sorts? And I don't even know, like for example, like probably museums of bigger sizes, you know, have
Bigger
different
sizes,
than the
bigger
mediums
problems,
and
right?
the small museums, right?
Yeah, everybody has pretty much the same problems. And just if you're a bigger museum, you have bigger problems to solve, right? A museum is tax exempt. What
Hmm.
does that mean? That means that the community, because that museum exists, and any nonprofit really, because it exists in that community is not getting tax revenue from that organization, right?
Hmm.
That's the kind of bare bones of what it means to be a nonprofit.
Yeah.
So what are you doing as an institution to offset that loss of tax revenue? So how are you building your community? And we always think about it as in two ways, right? So you have, and we think about it as an obligation, right?
Hmm.
If you're preventing that community from receiving tax dollars, which would go to services and all that kind of stuff, you have an obligation, and you have that
To
obligation
give
is in two
back.
parts, right? One is a social obligation, which is the mission of your organization and the providing benefit to the community in whatever way you might do. And we saw that kind of accelerate and double down during COVID when museums turned into safe spaces and you know giving out food and all those kinds of things. So social benefit. But the other one is social obligation. The other one is financial obligation, which is to run a business, right? In order to sustain that social obligation, you have to successfully run a business. But that also means, part of your community obligation is hiring people in the community, right? And giving them a job, a job that pays them, a living wage, because that's part of your community is your staff, as well
Yes.
as the people who come and visit it. So it's co-leadership, right? You have a creative director, and then you have a general manager. The creative director focuses on their creativity, the programming, putting on shows, all that programming stuff. And the general manager, runs the business,
Legend. Yeah.
right? And so they have
A
as long as you
duo.
get the right, as long as you get the right people, you have this expertise in running a business, an organization, and the old globe is successful because they have somebody who's very good at it. But it's also successful in attracting the audiences because the creative director has time to focus on creating something that is, an experience and
Fine.
exceptional and compelling.
Yeah. Yeah. So absolutely. Yes. And sometimes, like these people are entering to these challenges and they don't know what they don't know.
Mhm.
And it's also like, for example, sometimes it's interesting when we're selling, sometimes we get small museums and we see them grow. And it's so interesting because some grow and some just stay and some eventually disappear. Like a lot of, probably, I
Mhm.
don't know how many museums and cultural institutions have disappeared in the last, 5 or 6 years, but it is a tough environment. It's a tough
Yeah, we
environment.
had we had one in the park. Go under. They couldn't make it. Museum of Photographic Arts. Just at some point, the director couldn't figure out. Was unwilling, in my opinion, unwilling to take advice.
Mm.
And they ended up being consumed by the Museum of Art. So that what used to be the Museum of Photographic Arts is now part of the San Diego Museum of Art.
Mm. So, um, you've seen firsthand like how the system can change how museum operates, and like, can you give me an example of, for example, how certain museums, by implementing the right technology, like completely changed their trajectory?
I mean, I think it's, generally speaking, museum leadership don't understand the power of technology, right? They don't understand that it's a solution to a problem. So if you
Mm.
figure out what the problem is, you figure out the solution. And when we work with museums, it's oftentimes we go into an institution and they're like, we want to replace our ticketing and membership system. It's terrible. And it's like, well, is
Why?
it terrible? Or is it that you just don't know how to use it? And sometimes it is terrible. And over a drink, I'll tell you who's terrible. But normally, the problem isn't the system. The problem is the skill and the ability of the people who are using it. And assigning, and we see this all the time. We need to switch this out, and we're like, you need to get somebody in, a specialist in that system, or certainly in the discipline, to fix all the problems that you have. Because we'll go in and we'll say, okay, so you want to switch out the system, why? Well, it doesn't do this. It doesn't do moves management in the membership module. Like, well, actually, it does. It's just that you don't know how to do it. Because most of the time, if you can trace the problem back to the onboarding and the training of the implementation, right? Because they look at, museums will always want to value engineer technology that drives me to distraction. They always, here's what it costs for this technology, right? And it's an investment. It's not an expense. It's not that this thing costs 30,000. It's you're going to spend 30,000 on this system, and these are all the things it's going to give you, right? So
Yeah,
learn what it can do and use it to um, be more successful. So
absolutely.
reduce all the efficiencies, whether it's, reducing the number of clicks on the website to get to an actual transaction.
Increase your
Oftentimes
conversion.
conversion, right? It just, when you tell an institution, well, for every click you're losing 10% of your potential customer.
Yeah.
They don't believe you, right? They're like, no, these people want to come, so they're gonna figure it out. But
We'll we'll
you have
get we'll get it some way or another. And it's like, sure, sure.
right? But they just don't understand what it is to be an efficient, capable institution, and that's what technology is, right? It's not doing it's you could a lot of the stuff. Take Veevart for example. A lot of that stuff you could do it in spreadsheets and just a couple of people paying attention to it, right? That's wildly inefficient and
Yeah.
problematic, and prone to error. So you have a system that does it for you, right? And it's an investment. And so instead of having to have a specialist who's manipulating all these spreadsheets and all this other stuff, you have a system that is going to grow with you. If you pick the right vendor that has a product roadmap, and the functionality that's coming along, and that it's going to do these things, and it can give you reports and give you insight into your audience, tell you exactly what they're doing without you just pretending you know what it is. So it gives you all this information, and it just frustrates me that they don't understand the benefit that you can achieve with that. And so, when we go into a museum for strategic planning, we have a roadmap, which is we are going to fix you. If you have a growth goal, which most institutions have, right? A lot of them now are, maybe 20 or 30% down on attendance, which is a major revenue for them. Some institutions are doing okay. Some are back to pre-COVID um, levels, but there is so much inefficiency in museums. It is beyond belief. And so our goal is, can we give everybody an hour back a day?
Yeah.
Just because you have a
Yeah.
system that actually works. Oftentimes you have technology that it's not a tool, it's a barrier, right? There's this overhead and workaround in order to be able to do something. Um, and if somebody, you give one person an hour a day to be more efficient and do the actual job they were hired to do, instead of figure out how to use this system that doesn't work for them. For every 8 people, that's a whole FTE. That's a whole person. So
Yeah.
scale that.
That
If you're a larger institution,
it
scale
pays
that.
the system pays itself in a year. Absolutely.
Probably less. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
and so, that's always where we focus. And yes, then, and then you've got to focus on processes, right? How are you achieving the things you are doing? What is the most efficient and economical way? And then what is the system that's going to meet those goals?
And then
And
the other thing that we found that it's interesting is that are still out there is the disconnection of different systems and how like one doesn't talk to the other.
Mhm.
And it was, to me, it was interesting because it was like, well, like if I'm running memberships and I don't have the ticketing data, then it's like, oh, this guy, how does he know he's gonna renew? It's like, if I don't know, if I can't link, it's like, okay, did he came? Like, he came last this year, or has he come the last? Like, should I call him? It's like, hey man, like, why didn't you come? Like, you pay your license, you pay your membership, and you haven't come,
it, it,
right? So it's like,
it,
how do
it,
they?
it beggars belief. It just is. It just seems like there is, while institutions go through strategic planning, which have growth goals, it doesn't seem that those growth goals kind of extend down to people who are actually doing the job, right? They're just kind of doing the job, and they just deal with the problem that they are dealing with. They deal with the barrier that's in front of them. And so, we see it a lot connecting membership and visits, right? It should be, you should know when a high value person is coming in, or a potential high value person is coming in. The amount of effort in exporting financial data out of a ticketing or membership system into the institution's financial system, right? It's like a week-long process, and so prone to error and reconciliation and problems and back and forth. It's like it's we'd use the analogy of
And
buying.
it's interesting too because it is also kind of the like we've been actually working in this problem, and and it's so interesting because sometimes it's also like overcomplicated from the financial perspective, from the accounting
Right.
perspective. It's like, then obviously it makes it like sick that you have to manage all the different complexities. So like, just, can you just keep it simple and just like put
Mhm.
this in? No, because I need these funds, and some of that complexity is obviously justified, but the other ones
Right.
are just like, hey, there is. I tend to think it's like, look, if something is complicated, then we just haven't thought it through like fully,
Right.
right?
Don't
On that
overcomplicate.
perspective,
I
like
mean,
it's if it's complicated, then it's probably wrong. It's like
right.
it's probably
But I
wrong
think
from the design perspective.
oftentimes it is, they make it complex to justify their role, right? It's like you can't, so we're starting to see system like, like Veevart systems that are bringing these functions together in a single system. Half the problem is convincing an institution that you can do that successfully, right? Because they've always, they assume that there's this system over here and this system over here and this system over here. Putting it all together is easy to do now, right? It did used to be complicated. And But to say, you had this one-stop shop for doing, all these things, membership, ticketing, you know, events management, all that kind of stuff, development, donors, volunteer management. I mean, it you can do it,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it'll work, right? And it'll be an integrated, it'll be a cross-functional system.
Yeah. And it's interesting because the other thing is, you were expecting it's like you're looking for a partner that is going to listen to you. And it's like,
Hmm.
hey, these parts don't. It's like, oh, give me some time. Not
Hmm.
tomorrow. It's like we all have things to do and there's a plan and things
Right.
and stuff like that. But we'll get there. And so there's also that part of it, which is interesting. So when you go and you're working with these organizations, are you presenting to the board and you trying to make this return investment type of thing? Like, okay, we're
Hmm.
solving a problem. Are they being more receptive now? Are they trying to understand? Or there's still a disconnection? It's like, well, and I mean, that's okay with when they say, it's like, well, Nick, you know what you're talking about. Go ahead and do it. But how do you convince a board to make these investments?
So it kind of goes back to what I was saying about our process, right? So it's based on the theory of innovation, which we shamelessly stole from Clayton Christensen in one of his books about nonprofits. And so he talks about innovation there are three types of innovation. There is efficiency innovation, sustaining innovation, and growth innovation, right? And those are three different things. So we always start with, because the board's always, focused on growth. We want to do more. We want to do this. So we always start and say, okay, if you want to get to growth, that's growth innovation. These are the things you have to focus on, right? And the first one is efficiency, and it's about the right systems and processes that are efficient. And if that means replacing a current system, then that's what you need to do, right? Because you always got your eyes on the prize of growth. But you can't, if you don't fix your inefficiencies, you're just going to grow your inefficiencies, right? They're going to grow with
Oh,
you as you try and grow. So you got to fix all that first. And then that gives you a baseline of, you have the systems in place, the processes in place, the staff training, that's another efficiency that you need to focus on. So that's all in place. So then sustaining innovation is reducing, there is a when institutions think about growth, they think about doing more things, right? Do more things to get to more people. That's how we do it. That just dilutes your message and your ability. So we say focus on the core things that make you who you are, that align with your mission, that align with your goals and values, and get rid of everything else. That is a hard, fascinating, and interesting process to take a museum through because museums are these additive environments, right? Their collecting philosophy extends to everything. So they think we need to do more programs, we need to do more of this, we need more audiences, right? Instead of saying shrink it down and focus on the quality to raise the visibility of your message, right? So that you're not just diluting and trying to do too many things. So you have this core set of activities and programs and approaches and goals. And then you focus on growth, right? And this may take, each of those phases may be 1 to 2 years, right? And then
mm,
growth is just, okay, now you're in a growth phase, a mode of trying to grow audiences, languages, demographics, whatever it is. But you have to do it systematically. And
yeah.
if you can get the board to buy in on the growth strategy, then you say, well, that can only work if you start here, fix your infrastructure, train your staff, fix your processes, stop doing some things, and then you're in a position to successfully grow. It's a
And
hard
you know
message,
what? Yeah, and it's yeah, because adding is easy, but taking out is very, very hard.
right? Because it's so people are personally attached to what they're doing, and I get it. Um, and we don't say, but you're never going to do that again. But you've kind of got to shrink to expand. It's kind of like a catapult, right? You've got to shrink, pull stuff in, and then you have the ability to grow because then
Yeah.
you have more efficient processes and systems and et
And
cetera,
have
right?
a
Going
hard
with
a
them.
hard core. Absolutely.
Right,
Absolutely.
right.
And And so one of the things that, I'm curious about is, like I've always fascinated by these museums that arrive to do just that, right? Like they don't try to do many things. They don't even have or need a huge budget, but they deliver like just an amazing experience with what they have.
Mhm.
Um, and the community that they serve, which is also kind of super
Mhm.
interesting, right? Like how do they bring the community to just do like a very strong offering? Do you do you remember like is there any museums that you had that come to your mind that you when you come here when you went to that museum you're like, oh man, what a jewel this little museum is, or like they really like kick it out of the park with.
So not necessarily a small one, but I think I give a couple of examples which are really more approaches than anything else. So one of the most amazing experiences I've had in because I go to a museum, whatever it is, you walk around the collection and you're like, yeah, okay, that's great, pieces here, like, and you pick individual pieces and you're excited to see those things and you get something from it. But have you ever been to the Corning Museum of Glass
Hmm. No, no, I
in
haven't had
um
the
in,
chance.
in upstate New York? No.
Okay.
So anyway, Corning Museum of Glass, right? I mean, and they have a lot of resources, but it's a glass collection that you're going to go see. But before you go, you do this like 15-minute workshop, and you can choose from maybe five or six different ways of handling glass, right? You can either do shaping or blowing, or it's just very quick. But you immediately understand with a hands-on experience what it is to work with glass. And then you go into the collection, and all of a sudden, every collection object is interesting. I mean, everyone is. It's an amazing way to, and I think the message to museums is whatever museum it is, what is a small kind of onboarding thing that you can do to connect a visitor to the principle or the philosophy or the discipline of your museum, do that thing, and then let people go into the museum. We have the Midway aircraft carrier in San Diego, which is they have the most amazing volunteer program because most of the volunteers are veterans who have served on that ship.
Mm.
And whoever you talk to has a story about wherever it is they are. It's unbelievably fascinating. And so, it's that personal connection, right? So any institution that's figuring out, well, how do I make a personal connection between our collection and the visitor. And I think increasingly, particularly, maybe we'll talk about AI later, but AI has an opportunity to do that, right? To help you translate on your own terms an interaction with a collection.
I was going to ask you that is how are you seeing AI being implemented in museums? I mean, and there are like, for example, a lot of efficiencies in it. Like I'm just seeing it
Mhm.
from the perspective, it's like just translation, which is like
Mhm.
basic, right? That's already huge because
Right.
you don't need to then. I mean that the translation is pretty much just everywhere now. But what other things are you seeing in applications in the museum industry from with artificial intelligence?
So here's kind of the state of play of where we are, right? So, and this is probably 60 or 70% of the museum community. It might even be more. So the museum will have corporate board members, right, who are investing heavily in AI, and they're looking at the museum leadership and saying, what's your AI plan? And the leadership are like, I don't know, okay, we'll figure it out. And so there's a mandate from the board to leadership to say, tell us what your AI strategy is, how you're going to, whatever it might be. Meanwhile, pretty much every staff member is using their own personal account of,
ChatGPT or
ChatGPT,
Gemini or whatever.
Gemini, whatever it is, to accomplish their goals, right? And so you've got this kind of the problem is that that's this bottom up um, kind of initiative where AI is just happening in a museum. There are no policies or guidelines. People are potentially sharing, information, and so partly what we're trying to help institutions do is just focus on policy first, right? Get some professional. So people are using their personal accounts. All that information is getting shared. Might be okay, might not be. Um,
Right.
but get a professional account in an institution. Switch off the training. I mean, it's a little checkbox, right? You go to ChatGPT
Mm.
settings and say, don't train the model with this, and then you're free to share it. We have an interesting project in the park right now, which is a non-museum. They're a cultural kind of an environmental organization, and they're responsible for the park and the gardens and the trees and that kind of stuff. So the new director, she's like, we need to figure out what our AI strategy is, and the staff are saying, wait, we're an environmentally friendly, we're trying to conserve water. There's all these problems with AI, et cetera, et cetera. And so we don't want to do it. So you've got this kind of problem. So what we're stepping them through right now is this green AI maturity strategy, which
Oh,
is
interesting.
which is first to figure out get your ducks in a row, but really look first at making a decision on the actual platform that you're going to use, right? Because there's a lot of variation. It's kind of like the currency market. When Bitcoin came along, there were some marketplaces that were massively inefficient and some that were had green strategies. So, do the research to figure out define a green policy, right? So the irony is if you're trying to AI will help you sustain your organization, which will help you, sustain the programs that your organization is doing. And if you're an environmental organization, then you've got to balance that. So it's like, okay, if we're going to use AI, what else are we going to give up, or what other energy efficiencies are we going to do? So come up with that kind of perspective. Then pick an AI platform that has a green policy. And if you look at them now, a lot of them, I think, the research we've done, ChatGPT is probably the most environmentally friendly platform. So Copilot uses ChatGPT, so that's also up
Mm.
there. Gemini is a little behind, and there are some, depending on the size of the museums, there are some in Europe. There are some AI large language models that are totally carbon neutral and
No way, that's super interesting.
yeah, there's one in particular called, I think it's called Green PT, which is, that's its market, right? It's for small, you know, non-profits, although, public organizations in the UK, in Europe, and they have a carbon neutral platform. Um, and so
So
then,
it's but you bring two points that were interesting. One is that if you don't do these, people are still going to use them. It's
right,
a, and two, you have a fucking business to run.
right,
It's
but
like
that's it. That's the
like if
conundrum
you
that
if
which,
you if you're not taking advantage of these things that are going to give you efficiencies,
right,
then you're probably not running a good business and you're gonna be fall behind. And this problem, Nick, it's so interesting. It's not really only of museums.
right,
As I was reading this reporting, which is like, oh, 80% of the companies investing like millions and millions of dollars in AI, nothing to show for it. Um,
right.
which is like it's interesting because they're like, oh, we have to put AI on everything. It's like, well, just start with a problem, start with a problem,
Right.
try to fix it, right, and try to make it better at least. But it is interesting from that perspective. It'll be really interesting for the next 5 years, that's for sure.
It will. And if you look at the energy consumption, particularly of art museums, using AI across the entire organization, it pales into comparison to, the HVAC and, the environmental controls that,
Yeah.
to protect the collection. I mean, that stuff is orders of magnitude more than the AI usage. But the biggest problem museums have is, do you know what the number one carbon, highest carbon output is that museums are responsible for?
No, tell me.
Visitors.
No
If
way.
you right? So just think of the carbon. If you're a tourist, if you're in a tourist, city, and your museum has a very high tourism attendance, then you look at the carbon footprint of those visitors, flying from Europe or flying from the
Oh yeah,
east
yeah,
or
yeah,
the
yeah.
west coast, right? That which is an argument for more digital engagement and figuring out how to deliver digital programming that also brings in revenue, because that's going to be a lot cheaper than
Yeah.
uh, and
Moving people
right,
around.
and replace your old computers and your old servers, right, which are probably very energy inefficient, and that's part of our strategies is, okay, replace this old server, and that will give you 2 years of AI usage. I mean, it if you are serious about your energy usage and your impact on the environment, there are so many other things that you should be doing that would have a lot larger impact than AI usage.
Yeah. So you talked a lot about a lot about boards.
Mhm.
Um, but what about grants? Right now, grants are like probably at a high time low, like at a long time low, in general. But are there still some? Like, are there's still a
I mean,
good?
there's some out there. We were lucky enough to get a pretty significant grant from a local foundation to. So we own and operate the network in Balboa Park, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's both hardline, so it's a metro area network, fiber, high bandwidth, and then we run a free Wi-Fi service for the visitors, which also the institutions do business over for kind of mobile admissions and that kind of stuff. And we see about an average about 3,500 people a day on our Wi-Fi network, and it's old, right? It's
Well,
it's a what it was 15 years old. It was done in in the early teens, and so we had been trying to and that's tough. Raising money purely for technology is tough. But we were able to convince the local foundation, the Prebis Foundation, which is a fairly new private foundation, of the um, of the impact of it, not only from improving efficiencies and productivities and business, supporting the business of the institutions that we represent, of which there are 30, but also as a public service. And we got a $650,000 grant to replace everything: routers, switches, access points, etc. So there is money out there, but it's getting tougher. Most of these private foundations, particularly, are looking at healthcare and homelessness and food insecurity and those kinds of things, and education above cultural.
above
Um,
cultural stuff.
and so it's a tough market right now. And
Yeah.
so it's institutions, grants should always be the kind of icing on the cake, right, for an
Yeah.
institution. You should not, if you require grants to run your business, then you're in trouble, and it's probably only a matter of time. Which is
You
why.
know, yeah,
Go ahead.
which requires you to be like, even sharper on your business
Mhm.
skills. And so you were saying at the beginning of our conversation, like you've seen enough, you know, museum directors to know the good ones from
Mhm.
the bad ones. And that triggers me. So what do you think that are the three things that probably make a good museum director, or something that museum director should think? It's like, hey, am I thinking of this angle and this angle and this angle? And like, if those things are good, my museum should be good.
There's the problem I see. There's a difference between leadership and management, right? If you're a leader, you're doing two things. One is leading the organization, and the other is managing people. And it took me. It, it is definitely the case that the director of a museum sets the tone of an institution, right? That shit just rolls downhill, right? So if you have a director who doesn't understand, how can I put this diplomatically? Directors with big egos are really problematic, right? Because they think they should know everything and they have the answer to everything. And that's a real problem, right? And
Mm.
I don't think being a good leader is hiring people who are better at things than you, than some things, right? You're there to bring everything together, to orchestrate, right? You're like a conductor, and you need to hire the best musicians that are going to
Yeah.
deliver on the goods. And I think I've seen directors who are, um, they don't like hiring smart people, right? Because they don't want to hire somebody who they think is smarter than them, right? Which to me is like the exact opposite, right? If I can hire somebody smarter than me for less money than me, then that's a great situation to be in. But I think, there's a lack of appreciation. I think I see this, and this is not. There are some very good leaders, museum leaders out there who understand the value of staff and the investment in staff. But we see too many problems. I mean, and you're seeing it manifest right now with unionization, right? So the unions coming into institutions is because people aren't treated, they're not paid a living wage and they're not treated well, right? And so they're unionizing because they want to have a voice. That's a problem, right? The institution, the museums that the staff aren't trying to unionize are the ones that have strong leadership, good leaders, supportive leaders who let people do their job, and invest in them. And I think that's how anybody accomplishes anything in the business. It's the
Yeah.
people who end up doing it. So,
And you know what's so interesting? Like to me, even like in my personal journey as a founder, like I think if there was one lesson that I could, I'll ask you this question too. But when I got asked this question, I mean, it's like, what was the thing that I would tell to the Antonio from 10 years ago? I would say it's like, just promise that if you want to hire one person, that person needs to be better than the rest of the team in which you're putting it into. And it is interesting because I bootstrapped the company, and
Mhm.
and then when you're bootstrapping, you go to the war with the soldiers you got,
Right.
and sometimes kind of like it's like, no, I need to save this money so I can hire this guy who's
Right.
going to bring the rest of the team up. Because if I hire an intern or like a junior, which I did for a long
Mhm.
time,
Mhm.
it's actually going to bring the level down because people won't
Right.
have the time like to do the stuff. Like they
Mhm.
will also have to understand. And it was so interesting because at some point my investor said to me, it's like, Antonio, how more efficient are you than the 25 version of yourself, the 25-year-old version of yourself? I'm like,
Hmm.
40
Good, I
times.
think.
And it's like, and it's like, how more efficient are you than the 35 version that yourself? And it's like 20 times. And it's like, and what about the 40-year version? It's like 10 times. It's like, so what the fuck do you want to keep hiring younger people? It's like okay, I'll stop right now.
Yeah. I mean, it's so good to get perspective from outside the field,
Yeah,
right? And in your situation, you're in, like us, you kind of straddle this world of, you're responsible to investors, right? Who have a different mindset than the clients that you are responsible to,
yeah,
which is an interesting place to be. I always, my philosophy is hire somebody that you would want to work for and
yeah.
underneath, right? Because I think it's and I totally get that skill. You find the most skilled person that you can, but also the most curious person, right? I think you got to hire people who have curiosity and are not just going to sit in their job and do their job. They're going to want to, step out of their comfort zone, try and figure out the next thing and be curious about how they are delivering things.
So, if you were going to give that advice to a younger version of yourself, Nick, what would be the advice that you will give to the Nick from 20 years ago in terms of museums that you've learned, in terms of museum operations?
Hmm. It's a good question. I don't. I think this is a Steve Jobs quote, but it's "Don't settle."
Mm,
I think there were periods when, you work hard to achieve something, and then you're like, okay, I'm gonna sit back, take a breather. But I think, always be kind of pushing
The
forward.
envelope.
Yeah. And then, but also be mindful of yourself, and take some time to, look after yourself type of thing,
Oh
because
yeah.
it is it can be lonely at the top. I know it's a often used phrase, probably a bit, but it is, there are problems that you have in your job that you really don't want to share with anybody, certainly not in your organization, because you don't want them to get concerned about it. But
And that is so interesting, Nick, because I don't think, even in the museum industry, and I think honestly every business is different, right? And
right,
and you as the director, you see things, so some people will only see certain parts, but you're the only one seeing everything. And sometimes, that part of communication uh, is so crucial because you're the only one who has the full picture. And
right,
so how to bring that full picture is like, no, I'm doing this because I'm seeing this on the other side, and I'm seeing this on the other side, and I'm seeing this other side. And so sometimes I think to me actually it's been one of the things that I said is like, oh, when you get into these management roles, communication becomes so important. And it's so
right.
interesting because sometimes you see it's like, am I speaking English here? Like, am I speaking another language? Like
Mhm.
we're not getting to understand each other here. It's so interesting in that regard. And what you're talking about, that I think it's that loneliness that you say at the top.
Mhm.
Like it is okay to admit it, and to admit it
Mhm.
to each other, and to admit it as like,
Mhm.
yeah, it gets lonely, get lonely out
Right.
there. And the good thing about it though in the museum industry is that I do see a lot of camaraderie in
Mhm.
the
Right.
cultural. Like I love going to IAM and
Mhm.
um to all these events of like children museums and science museums, and you can see people talking and people sharing experiences. Like it's a very united front in the museum industry, which is great.
It is a very supportive environment. Sometimes, I wish it was a little more aggressive, but this
But
I've been in
Nick,
it long enough.
like, what about Europe? Like, the US is significantly more aggressive than Europe.
That's true.
Oof. I don't know. Like, could we? I actually am. I am in awe of the museum industry in the US because I don't
Mm.
see it. I mean, like, for example, in Latin America, there is this very heroic fight for culture because
Mhm.
the Americans are very generous. Like the Americans are like, okay, we need to support this, we need to support that.
Mhm.
Yeah, Latin America is like,
Mhm.
to your point, like let's donate to food and other
Right.
type of medical stuff, and not so much on the cultural part of things. So people who work on those things are really like kind of heroes, but at the same time there is a like an underestimation of the value that they provide. And I always tell them, it's like, look, New York is not New York, and then it has the MoMA and the Met, and it's
Mhm.
like, no, New York is New York because of the MoMA and the Met and the culture and all
Right.
this. That's why New York is New York. Like, if you take these things out, eh,
It's not right. It's not the same thing.
Eh,
Yeah.
you're taking 50% of the value. Like, it's like, okay, if
Mhm.
the culture is not there, then what are we doing here? Just, getting a
Right.
drink or whatever. And
You're
and I think
exactly
that
right.
we underestimate that value sometimes in Latin America.
Mhm.
Nick, I'm gonna ask you last question, then I'm gonna let you
Mm.
go. And I think you mentioned it, but what's your definition of a successful museum?
I never think about success as this kind of big event. This one thing is like, oh, now they are successful. I,
Mm,
I think it's made up of just daily successes that, should be celebrated. Always, you know, coming up with a growth strategy for an institution, right? Success is month on month. you're achieving those goals, right? So it's, rather than this kind of big, and if you have big wins, you celebrate them. You have a big opening, for an exhibition. But really, the real work is the day-to-day grind when you are, slowly moving things forward and having those kind of minor successes that then all accumulate. When you look back, it's like, oh, 6 months ago we were here and now we're here. And, every day was a small incremental increase. I think the fact that some museums are still around, because it's a tough time out there, right now. There's a lot of belt tightening and issues that museums are facing. I wish they were a little more creative and would look outside the field. I think to solve some of their problems, that kind of whole um, that insular thing. I mean, I think when I think of big successes, my current poster child is the Tank Museum in the UK. I don't know if you're familiar with them, which
I saw a video on YouTube on how they were engaging like with YouTube videos like a
right?
worldwide uh you know
It's an amazing story of
yeah,
how I mean, they're a tiny museum in the middle of the UK near some army barracks, right? And they had small attendance, but managing to survive. And with COVID shut down, most of their revenue disappeared. So they started doing YouTube videos. And again, kind of going back to earlier conversation, really engaging curator talking about tanks. And they started getting a lot of views on YouTube, and this
and
is something that,
donations.
and donations, right? And this is something that museums don't
Yeah,
understand, particularly when it comes to the revenue. You can build a YouTube channel and generate money from it, but not having to do anything apart from post videos, as long as they're engaging. So
yeah.
they went from zero digital revenue, and I think now um, they're bringing, I want to say, close to 3 million pounds a year now over the last 4 to 5 years, and they did it through, revenue from YouTube. They're using Patreon to deliver premium
Okay.
first-time content. Biggest demographic is US males 18 to 45, right? So they got that global market, but the
Amazing.
the real revenue comes from, they just acknowledged that they had an online audience, so they just developed a merchandise um, mix to sell purely online, and that's where a lot of their revenue comes from. And I think it was again turning a problem into a success, faced with serious consequences as a result of the shutdown. They now have a very compelling and profitable revenue stream, in which any museum could do it, right? You
Yeah.
just got to have engaging content and have a little know-how in how to get it out there and promote it.
And you know what? And the passion is there. It's
The passion, right?
the passion is always there. Like every time that I go to a museum, like visiting a client or whatever, it's I always come out of there. It's like this place is amazing. Like this place is amazing
Right?
because
Right?
they went in and it's like and they kind of give you the
They
entire
give you the tour and yeah,
history of it and
right.
the tour. Like I was just like you were talking about this air museum in San Diego. I was just in the New England Air Museum
Mhm.
and they actually allow you to go into one of the planes and it's like a plane from World War II and you sit down in that cockpit and you're like
Right?
putting this and you can picture yourself like this plane was built where there were no computers, everything was by hand, this thing was
Mhm.
flying and they were like 8 hours and you're just like look at it and you feel the vertigo on it, you're like
Mhm.
ugh. It's like
Right? It
it's
doesn't take
amazing.
much, right, to make that connection.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. Nick, thank you so much for your time. This was great, man.
This was fun. Yeah, it's good
Listen,
to chat.
I will one more question.
Mhm.
What director in the US do you think we should interview next? That you think is doing really interesting stuff that could help other museum leadership into like, hey, we need museums right now to focus on the business side of things because the business needs to take care of it so it can exist. sometimes I think it's to your point about the nonprofits at the beginning,
Mm.
right? Like, the business need to be taken care of. And I was wondering, like, if who comes to mind when you're thinking about it's like, hey, this is a museum that is well run, and these people has a lot to say that the community will be able to learn a lot from.
Which museum is well run? Personally, I would say get somebody from outside the museum community because I think, we're such an echo chamber. So it results in kind of incremental improvement, right? So if we go into an institution and we say, Here's some innovative or creative ideas," and the leadership will say, well, who's doing that right now? That's not the question to ask. It's like, does this fit your mission? Is it appropriate for you to pursue this thing but oftentimes there's an unwillingness to do that. They don't want to be first, right? They want to be second or third. You want to bring in somebody who is what might be regarded as a competitor to museums, right? So
Oh,
I would find a director of one of those, figure out what it is they've
it's
got,
interesting
because
what the Van Gogh Museum is doing a lot with their collection, right? Because they're like, well,
Van Gogh
they can't
Museum,
move it. They can't move it
right?
because so they kind of came up with this thing to in which they're creating a full revenue, and it's like traveling thing, and it makes a lot of money.
Right. And I think that's what, I remember bringing, I mean, partly you should interview yourself, right? Because I think museums need more of an entrepreneurial spirit. I remember we work a fair amount with startups and entrepreneurs. And I remember bringing one in, I'd only been down in San Diego, um, I don't know, 6 months. And we were talking about developing a mobile platform in the park. And so I took this young guy, kind of serial entrepreneur, was a day trader at one point, so had some money, but knew how to get money from investors. And we're walking around the park, and I'm like, what's the one thing that you would change in this park? And he said, I wouldn't open until midday, and I would close at midnight. He said, the problem with museums is they're open when the people who don't have money are free. And he's right. You know what? There was we have Comic-Con museum in the park, and they hired a guy to come in and figure out what does a Comic-Con museum look like? Because Comic-Con was known for its
Is it
annual
he
convention.
who's running Exploration Place in
Yes,
Wichita?
yes.
Oh, he's amazing. He's
He is
amazing.
great, and he came in, and you should talk to him because he not only is he very engaging, but he said when he came to Comic Con, he said we have three audiences. All these museums do all these kind of analysis of personas and all that kind of stuff. And he's like, nope. He said we have three audiences. He said we have a daytime audience, we have a nighttime audience, and we have an online audience, and we need to invest in those three. And he is yes, and I'm completely blanking on his name now, but we got on really well when he was in the park, and I had a huge amount of respect for him.
Adam. Yeah, yeah, no, he's amazing, and he's actually one of our clients. He's actually big. He pushed me super hard on our ticketing lately. He's like,
Right?
we want to take all this stuff out. I was like, yes, yes, yes. I was like, we're working on it, we're working on it. But yeah, yeah, he's good. He's tough,
Yeah.
and he's actually expanding his thing. So he got
Right. He
such
has
a
a good
tight
he has a
niche.
good business. Yeah, he has a
Oh
good
yeah,
business mind as well. Yeah, I'd say him, and I'd say find out who the competition is, and and
yeah, awesome,
and
Nick.
and and the other thing, yeah, an emerging professional, right? If you want to figure out what the future of museums might be from a internal standpoint, talk to somebody who's only a couple of years in and see what their thinking is.
They're thinking is absolutely. All right. Nick, thank you so much. This was so much
Yes,
fun, man. It
it
was
was fun,
awesome talking to
Antonio.
you.
You too. Appreciate the opportunity.
All right, my friend. I'll talk to you
Okay, my
soon.
friend.
Bye
Take care.
bye.
Bye.
So first, thanks for listening and watching and spending some time with us during our first episode. We hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as we did. And if you'd like to catch more episodes of the Cultural Animals, the Museum Leadership Lab, please share and subscribe to the podcast. And you can listen to it on Apple Podcasts, or you can listen to it on Spotify, or rewatch the full episode on YouTube. Yes, I'm bringing the thing. And then also, make sure to follow Veevart on LinkedIn and Facebook and X and whatever other social media thing we're going to put this on. and we'll be sharing more content and inviting other leaders from the museum and cultural industry. We definitely want more culture and more museums everywhere. So until then, please take care of my friend, and then we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.